Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Scott Sinclair. I'm the Senior Manager of Programs here at Cancer and Careers, and I am here to welcome you this evening. For those of you who are listening in on your phone, please let us know by sending an email to cancerandcareers@cew.org with your name and the phone number that you're dialing in from. That way we can confirm your attendance and make sure that you receive all the relevant follow-up information after the webinar. If anybody here is new to Cancer and Careers, we are a national nonprofit and the only program of its kind solely dedicated to empowering and educating people with cancer to thrive in their workplace. This lists all of our free programs and services that we offer. Our comprehensive website, available in both English and Spanish, is the heart of everything that we do. There you can find various support services, including our resume review service and access to career coaches. Our educational blog and news feed are both rich resources where those who have been diagnosed, their caregivers, employers, healthcare professionals can stay current on topics related to work and cancer. Our free publication library is available in both English and Spanish and provides tangible, easy to digest information on working and looking for work after a cancer diagnosis. And they're available both in hard copies and PDFs. We also offer numerous events each year, from hour-long webinars like the one that you're attending today to full-day events. And I will be back at the end of the presentation to tell you a little bit more about what we have coming up. For those of you who are seeking continuing education credits, this slide lists all of the organizations that have accredited today's webinar, as well as the required steps for getting a certificate. This information is also available on our website, and a link to the evaluation and post-test will be shared at the conclusion of the webinar today. So please take the time to complete it at that point. But if you're not able to complete it today, that's totally fine. You'll receive an email sent no later than tomorrow, November 2nd, by 5 p.m. Eastern Time, which will have a link to that as well. And for those of you planning to request continuing education credits, our accrediting bodies require us to share this slide to let you know that there are no conflicts of interest to report. As you might know, Zoom has a lot of great features which you can use to interact with us today. The chat box in your features panel, feel free to use the chat box to communicate with our speakers, our staff, and other attendees. However, it's important to note that the chat box is not private and will show your first and last name. So that's something to be mindful of when and if you decide to engage in the chat. The Q&A box is also there. If you have any questions, we'll be doing Q&A at the end. So drop your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box. There's a chance we might miss something in the chat box. And we know the importance of privacy, so there is the option to submit your questions anonymously in the Q&A box. If we don't get to your question today, please send us an email, cancerandcareers@cew.org, and we will get you a one-on-one response to your question. Now, thanks in part to support from Genentech and QVC, Cancer and Careers is proud to offer this 9th year of the Balancing Work and Cancer webinar series, which was created to provide anyone whose life has been touched by cancer with concise, targeted information about work-related issues that arise after a diagnosis. And we are also happy to welcome Beijing as a lead sponsor of tonight's webinar. Additionally, we'd like to recognize Cancer and Careers as year-round sponsors who support all of our core programs and allow us to continue providing all of our resources and services free of charge. Now, as many of you know, cancer often impacts more than just the person with the diagnosis. For those in a caregiving role, there are often new emotional and practical responsibilities taken on. It can often feel as if those who are caregiving are working 2 full-time jobs, which can lead to feeling overwhelmed. The challenge to meet these many responsibilities while also preserving energy for yourself, your family, and your job. To help walk you through this tonight, we're joined by Brandon Gottlieb and Nicole Jarvis. Brandon has more than 20 years of experience in the talent acquisition industry and is currently the Director Talent Advisor at the largest nonprofit health plan in New York State. He's also one of CAC's volunteer career coaches and has personal experience as a caregiver to his daughter. Nicole is the Assistant Director of Programs here at CAC as well as one of our in-house social workers. Once again, I'll be back at the end of tonight's presentation to give you a little bit more, but for now, I will hand it over to Nicole and Brandon.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott, and welcome, Brandon. We're so grateful that you could join us this evening. So I just want to jump right into it. I want to start out today by talking about something that many caregivers may relate to. We know that caregivers of people diagnosed with a serious or chronic medical condition often find themselves confronting some common misconceptions related to work. These things may include they don't want to work or won't be as productive because of their caregiving responsibilities, or that because they themselves are fine, they don't need any special considerations on the job. Now, because these are largely faulty assumptions, they also serve as barriers to other people understanding the full picture of an individual's experience. So one of our goals for tonight is to illustrate that there's much more nuance involved with caregiving in the workplace than a lot of these misconceptions will allow for. So the AARP Public Policy Institute released a report on caregiving in 2020 that illustrated many caregivers' shared experiences. The majority of caregivers were managing work either part-time or full-time while caregiving. And of those, many experienced an impact to their employment situation as a result of their caregiving responsibilities. Days off, cutting back work hours, and even leaves of absence were all cited as ways that they changed their approach to work while they were caregiving. Now, this is, of course, not everyone, but it can be validating to recognize that these are some of the ways caregivers were able to balance their work and caregiving responsibilities. So we can't really discuss the experience of caregiving without digging into some of the challenges that are associated. From that same AARP study, 3 primary struggles were cited. The first was mental strain. Feelings of stress, guilt, anger, anxiety, and so much more were prevalent among caregivers. And then there was physical strain, experiencing their own health challenges as a result of this new amount of emotional stress, but also some of the physical aspects, such as less personal time in the day to address self-care, less sleep, maybe taking over more household tasks. And then there was financial strain. This can be challenging to plan for since there's no set timeline. And you're often taking on debt, maybe medical, loss in income from your partner not working, or loss in income if you yourself have your work hours cut, etc. So these are all things that a lot of them had cited as being challenges. And I wonder if, Brendan, if you can speak to a few of those as well.
Absolutely. I imagine that this would resonate with any caregiver on the call today, and they certainly do for me. My daughter was diagnosed with medulloblastoma. She was 6.5 when she was diagnosed. So for my wife and I, at times, we barely slept. We were either planning for the next day, the next week, or simply worrying about test results. When we did sleep, we became very light sleepers. The slightest sounds would make us jump. My wife stopped working, and fortunately I was able to keep working, but over the years we met many other caregivers at Memorial Sloan Kettering on the 9th floor, if anyone's familiar with the pediatric floor, an amazing place. We met many people along the way who were either unable to work or not local and living at a Ronald McDonald House, trying to balance going back and forth. Yeah, I mean, caregivers often sacrifice their own well-being for their loved ones, especially when caring for a child.
Thank you for sharing that with everybody. I'm sure it helps them to kind of understand what your perspective is tonight as well. So tonight, we really want to focus on thinking through your circumstance and how to best approach making decisions around best plans of action. It's important to remember that you shouldn't feel obligated to make decisions right away or even all at once. This can be a really fluid process. You may experience a range of emotions related to processing your loved one's diagnosis. This can include shock, stress, anxiety, depression, numbness, an urgency to get things moving, and so on. Regardless of the specifics, know that whatever you're feeling is valid. There's no right reaction in these kinds of scenarios. While you may feel you need to be stoic for your loved one, allowing yourself to feel these emotions can be an important part of preparing to make future decisions. So really giving yourself the space to breathe and process can help you get centered and focused. So in this way, the next steps can feel a little bit more manageable. Now, over the next few slides, we're going to discuss what it looks like to identify and ask yourself key questions, how to gather information and what to gather, how to get organized to better understand what your options are, and really to make an action plan for moving forward that works around your loved one's treatments, surgeries, medical interventions, and then really how your work might fit into these factors as well.
Caregivers don't often get to decide if they'd like to become a caregiver or not, especially when caring for a child or any loved one. But even still, you have to ask yourself questions like these in order to prepare yourself for the challenges that you will face. Depending on how long care is needed, you may have to reassess these questions again over time.
Mm-hmm.
What are your loved one's needs? What are your needs and wants? Will you experience a financial impact related to caregiving? How will your caregiving responsibilities impact your work life? Is your identity connected to work? Have your career priorities changed? How will you make time for prioritized self-care? What are the other personal and family obligations that need to be prioritized? The answers to these questions will differ for everyone. Some people need to be there for an hour per week to drive someone to appointments, and for other people, it's a 24/7 job. We often put our own needs aside, but you have to consider who can you rely on. The caregiver will inevitably need someone for themselves at some point. Maybe it's simple things, or maybe it's something to pick up the kids from the bus or to be home for a delivery that's coming. It's critical to not let our own lives fall apart.
Self-care is definitely so important. So once you've asked yourself these many questions, you're going to need to begin to gather information. So we separate these into buckets so that they're easier to organize. So this first bucket is medical and practical information. So about your loved one. So this is information on your loved one's medical and practical needs, including appointments, treatments, surgeries, timelines, needs, and side effects, and so on. Then you're also going to want to look at your own medical and practical information, since your needs and health are not completely on hold at this time. Also look into support and resources that might benefit you, and consider what other personal obligations you might have. Then the next one is work information. So looking into things like policies, PTO, leave banks, and really thinking about the culture of your workplace and your job demands. All these things can really help to inform your decisions. And finally, legal information. It's worth gathering legal information about federal, state, and local laws that may be applicable to working caregivers, because a lot of people might assume that things don't apply to them, but it's always worth doing that research from the start. So medical information should be gathered from your loved one's healthcare team. So this includes, as I mentioned, timelines for surgery, chemo or radiation, as well as what potential side effects you can expect. This information can help you figure out whether it will be possible for you to work during all of your loved one's treatment, or if you may need to take time off. So as Brandon mentioned, if it's just driving them to appointments, or if it's needing to be by their side every day during the day. It'll also help you to understand the extent to which you'll be physically needed as a caretaker. You know, if it's, for example, if it's likely that the side effects are expected to hit them pretty hard, factor that in as you figure out what a realistic plan will really look like for you. And it's a good idea to become aware of supportive services available, such as transportation, financial assistance opportunities, as well as specific guidance on how to best play the caregiver role. We've found and heard that hospital social workers can really be a great help with these.
Depending on, were you going, are you okay for me? I don't want to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Depending on the relationship, the caregiver may or may not have the opportunity to be given information from the doctors directly. But whenever possible, caregivers should try to have firsthand information as much as they can. Try not to rely on secondhand information passed down from your loved one. In my case, this was not the issue when you're dealing with a child, but it certainly can be. If it was my father, I'm sure I never would have heard anything firsthand. So I would have absolutely had to have been in every meeting. But this goes for financing as well. Caregivers might want to meet directly with finance departments. Many hospitals, to Nicole's point, also have what they're called patient advocates or caregiver advocates. And these are usually volunteers who check in with patients and caregivers. Take advantage of them in any way that you can when you have questions, concerns. My wife and I sometimes would lean on them to try to see what was taking so long, if we were stuck in a waiting room, things like that. But they're usually there, and when they're available, take advantage of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to quickly shout out this organization that we've linked on the bottom of the slide called $4. They assist patients and families on understanding if they're eligible for charity care from hospitals. So help with medical bill relief and things of that nature. So they basically do all the work, which is really nice. You give them all the documentation, they do a screening. And so if you are concerned about the medical bills that might be piling up, it's definitely worth looking into that. A lot of people are unaware of the charity care in most hospitals. So.
Research policies and benefits related to your job before you disclose to anyone at work. Identifying and understanding existing policies like leave policies, remote work options, scheduling flexibility, employee assistance programs and policies, employee portals and handbooks, trusted colleagues who have a good grasp of the company culture and environment. From an HR perspective, again, I have 25 years in talent acquisition and HR. It's important to really be informed of your options. Just being on the Zoom, even knowing about cancer and careers, to me, it means that you're actually ahead of many of other caregivers who are, when it comes to looking for resources. So kudos to everyone who's taken the time to join this webinar. I'd also mention that this might be the only time when it's good to look online to gather information, because it's not good usually to search the web when you first learn of your loved one's diagnosis. Seeing those kinds of statistics or random medical histories can be disastrous. Certainly for me and my wife, we had to make sure we were off the internet for stuff like that. But in this particular case, it is really good to research your federal laws, state laws, company policies, and networks for resources like these, like Cancer and Careers. Work relationships with your boss, your team, your colleagues really come into play here, depending on the situation. And this was certainly the case for me. I had to ask myself every single day, where do I need to be tomorrow? Every day. I could not think much further ahead than that. And I needed my calendar to include everything, reminders, alerts, etc. And any day I might be telling colleagues or my team that I needed to cancel every single thing for tomorrow and figure out a way to do it on another day. And everything was up in the air.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned before, knowing who you can rely on and when is a really important part of this process, part of the information gathering process as well. So we do recommend gathering legal information. And this isn't because we think that a situation is likely to become litigious. Rather, for many people, the law becomes a key tool in helping them pull together a plan for working while balancing additional responsibilities like caregiving. Now, as I mentioned, I'm a social worker and not an attorney. So if you are interested in learning more about which federal or state workplace laws and protections may or may not be available to you, I do encourage you to reach out to a legal expert to confirm. And you can also find much more broad, reliable information about laws on various government websites, as well as educational blogs and resources. I've shared some of them at the end of the presentation, and as Brennan mentioned, this is a time when you should use the internet and lean on all of the information that is available to you. And you can probably speak to, what the companies themselves might know about the law and legal policies.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, not all companies can be equally accommodating. And so it's your responsibility, I think, to really understand what's available to you and what laws are there to support you and whatnot. And some smaller companies, for example, small businesses, they may want to be accommodating, but they just simply aren't built for it. So it's really critical that caregivers understand their rights in the law. I live in New York, for example, and that means if I went on short-term leave or long-term leave, I would have only been eligible for like 67% of my salary, up to a cap that was actually less than 67% of my salary. My wife wasn't working. This wasn't really a realistic option for us. So I had to know what was available and how to figure out how to balance working full time with being there for my daughter every step of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So tonight we are obviously going to discuss a little bit about some of the laws, and as I mentioned, just a little bit because I am a social worker and not an attorney. So the first one is eligible caregivers may be able to access job protected and health insurance protected leave under the Family and Medical Leave Act, also known as the FMLA. And this can allow qualified individuals to take time off to care for a spouse, parent, or a child with a serious medical condition. Again, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this today. So for more information, you can check out our website as well as the resources that I've listed at the end of this presentation, just to really get you started. But it is worth noting, some states also have laws that offer protections for working caregivers. So we recommend looking into those too, because sometimes they go beyond just what is available via the federal laws. Another relevant federal law that I'm going to spend just a little bit more time on is the Americans with Disabilities Act. A lot of you have probably heard of it as the ADA. It is federal, so it applies in all 50 states. And like all laws, it does have certain requirements in order to use it. What's important for you to know is that eligible caregivers may be protected from discrimination under the ADA, but not entitled to reasonable accommodations, which is an additional benefit that may be available to the person that you're caring for who has the diagnosis. But many employers are willing to make accommodations that allow caregivers to stay on the job simply because they want to support their valued employees. So some of these might include working a full-time but flexible schedule. So working the same number of hours, but distributing them differently. So let's say maybe a 9 to 5 day becomes a 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. day so that you can take your loved one to their afternoon appointments. Working remotely, part-time or full-time might be another solution. And these days, that might even be how you're already working. This can eliminate a draining commute and reserve some of your energy to work, or it can also allow you to stay physically close to your loved one. Perhaps if you are caring for a child, you'd obviously need to be home for them all the time. So just something to consider. It's also important to remember that replacing a valued employee is really time consuming and it's very costly. So many employers want to do everything possible to make sure that you're able to keep your job as a valued employee. And ultimately, it's so important to remember that the only definite no is the question not asked. So it's always worth exploring what options are available and never making assumptions that something isn't a possibility for you. Now, having all of this information can feel really overwhelming as you're both participating in the coordination of care for your loved one and addressing your own needs. So getting organized can be very, very helpful. With the necessary information in hand, you can sit down and assess options for what your work and your schedule will look like. You'll also want to look at your options when it comes to who and what you tell about your situation. Will you prefer to keep this between you and your supervisor? Is it helpful to inform coworkers so that they're aware? These are all decisions to make based on what you learned and came across in your information gathering phase. And getting and staying organized can also help remove some of the strain and some of the stress from work. And it can help you be better prepared for having a plan A or B or C, because it's possible and likely that your plan may not work out as exactly as you anticipated. So really having information on hand so you're able to really pivot when necessary can also greatly reduce some of that stress and really help you to plan ahead. Now we want to just talk about some of your best practices for getting organized and staying organized. Now, keeping all of your paperwork and documents in one place may seem like a really simple thing, but it can make a huge difference. It can reduce the headache of searching for important details that are necessary to make appointments, or navigate insurance, so on. It's also common that when fact-finding, you might come across relevant information or information that's not relevant today, but maybe useful down the line. So putting it in your centralized storage location means that you'll know where to look for it when the time comes that you actually do need it. Also, helping track questions or concerns or thoughts of the person you're caring for can be really helpful if any cognitive challenges like fatigue or just the stress of treatment start to impact their memory or yours. This can ensure that nothing gets missed during appointments or other conversations with providers. And ultimately, it can help if you don't have to rely solely on your memory as you juggle everything at once. I'm curious if that speaks to your experience as well.
You have to be super organized, both for yourself and for your loved one, of course. For me, my calendar was critical. I had alerts. They weren't just appointments. It was alerts for when my daughter needed to take her meds, alerts for when I thought I might hear back on a confirmation for something. And if I didn't hear it, I would call. An alert for everything I could think of. I had different colors for work appointments and personal appointments. I had reminders on my calendar to remember to eat, to just make sure I didn't, the day goes by and you didn't actually eat anything at some point. So things like that, you have to just, and we'll talk, I think, a little later on a little bit about taking advantage of technology, but that was for me when I needed to stay. This was my calendar.
I mean, a calendar is key in organization and time management.
So getting organized, some best practices, getting organized, some additional things to talk about, taking notes during important conversations with medical professionals, employers, et cetera. It takes the burden off your loved ones so they can focus on conversation with their healthcare team. Making audio recordings may also be good, or even a better option if the person you're speaking with agrees. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but notes and recordings remove the pressure of relying heavily on your own memory. On more than one occasion, we asked doctors if we could record a conversation. We always ask. You never just want to hit the button right when they're about to talk. They might get a little thrown off by that, but ask first. And this was especially helpful at the beginning when a lot of information gets discussed, and it can be very overwhelming. When you have a recording, you have the ability to go back and re-listen for specific instructions or specific details that you might not be sure if you remember correctly. There are moments where it can be very helpful.
Yeah, and absolutely. And you always do have to ask, some people are concerned, some doctors might be concerned that you're using it for the wrong reason, or to have an I told you so or a gotcha moment. But I think the majority of them are pretty open to it. It's also important that you write everything down for the future you to refer back to. Recording the names of people who are helpful at the hospital. You're going to be meeting so many people, so many different people in charge of different things, scheduling, actual doctors and nurses and all of that. So it's really a good idea to really keep track of them so that you can also ask for them if you need to call for updates. It's also a good idea to jot down any tips that are given to you from others in the caregiving community. I know that in the cancer community, people are always willing and eager to share their experiences with others who might be going through something similar, and sharing what works, what doesn't work, stay away from this, stay away from that. So that can be really helpful. And especially, I know that you had mentioned before, Brendan, that you spend a lot of time in the waiting room. So yeah, connecting with people that are there and learning from them can be really helpful.
Yeah.
And it can be a challenging and somewhat isolating experience being responsible for the care of another in this way. So learning from others' experiences can really help make the process less of a constant guessing game, and you can maybe feel a little bit more prepared and like you know what you can do for your next step. So now we'll move on to an action plan. Creating an action plan to the extent that it's possible can also help to empower you, maybe even regain a sense of control over your work circumstances. So really quickly, I just want to go over what a successful action plan is. First, you want to address your needs and goals, both as a person and a caregiver. So work, caregiving, personal life, etc. You also want to make sure that it identifies priorities while remaining flexible. So things tend to evolve due to the fluidity of treatment. It also should incorporate your employer's needs as well as your own. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that you should be putting your employer's needs above your own, but there should be some room to negotiate how work gets done. It's really important that you make sure that this gets woven into your thinking as well. Then for some, asking for help can be challenging. And as Brendan mentioned before, doing so when and where you feel comfortable can alleviate some of the stress and worries that may be weighing you down. So at work, this can mean creating a plan with your supervisor that both you and they feel comfortable with, and maybe planning for regular check-ins to make sure everyone feels good about it. And then finally, as we've already discussed, there's a really big benefit to having things written down. So a practice that we often encourage is a work diary. So your work diary can be particularly helpful as a place to really lay out concerns and potential solutions together. What changes do you anticipate to your work life? A different schedule or not being in person as much may mean needing to rethink how to best continue to get your work done. Think realistically about what it might look like to take leave or work flexible hours. If your leave is unpaid, what kind of impact will that have? How can you plan for that? For many, again, we're going to say this over and over again, it can be really challenging to ask for help, but trying to develop some comfort with doing so can make a really big difference. Talk with your supervisor about delegating some responsibilities, maybe temporarily. Perhaps if you have kids, maybe ask friends or family if they're able to drive them to and from school or activities or play dates, so that you're really able to focus your energy and attention on caregiving and getting your work done. Boundaries are also a really important aspect of balancing life and work for all of us. So when caregiving is thrown into the mix, setting boundaries is even more important. We'll talk a bit more about setting boundaries later, but for now, I'll say your work diary can be a really good place to jot down thoughts you have about where they might be needed. And remember, with the ability to pivot your plans as necessary, that is really the key to setting yourself up for success, because as we all know, things don't always go as according to planned. Now, this is also a place where you can map out an overview of your loved one's treatment, and along with the type of support that may be required from you. So again, including important dates and information about maybe potential recovery time, and then comparing those dates to your work calendar and seeing where there might be any issues or conflicts in terms of scheduling can really set you up to have a better picture. Of course, there may be certain appointments and treatments that are date specific, but it can be worth talking with your healthcare team to see where there is flexibility. Your schedule is really an area where there's an opportunity for you to feel more in control of a process that tends to feel way out of your control. So I wonder if you might be able to speak to how you handle that.
Certainly, it depends on what everyone is going through and everyone's personal story. In our case, there were, especially at the beginnings of treatments, at the beginning of sections of things that we had to do throughout, there were some opportunities to talk about maybe early mornings for checkups or blood tests or things that we could do in person versus at a local lab versus driving all the way into the city or something like that. But to your point, for the big stuff, the surgeries, you don't get to, you just get told where to be and they don't ask you if you're free that day or not.
Right.
But, so you have to rely on others sometimes.
Absolutely. And one area where you might have to rely on others also is creating a self-care plan for yourself. As we've mentioned a number of times now, self-care for a caregiver is incredibly important. So you want to be specific with yourself about when and how that will happen for you amidst all that's going on and all the tasks that you're going to be juggling. So small things like making sure to just go outside and get fresh air every day, to bigger things where you may schedule some solid alone time for yourself can really pay off in keeping you grounded and helping to de-stress. So really being able to maybe ask for help if someone could come over to watch your kids so you can go to the gym, and get some exercise if that's what you like to do, or maybe if you're taking a class, things like that, all worth exploring and what makes the biggest difference for you. And I wonder if you had anything that was particularly important for you when you were caregiving.
For me, honestly, and it has something somewhat similar to the work diary, writing always helped me. And whether writing might mean, writing on my phone, on an app on my phone, but writing and sort of getting it out of my head has always helped me tremendously. It's more sort of my way to vent. And this also, in this particular case of caregiving, really helps you sort of remember specifics because you're sort of jotting thoughts down in real time. And sometimes it's work related, sometimes it's not, but sometimes it's separate, sometimes it's not, but just trying to getting it kind of on the page, if you will. And then of course, if you have it, on like an app or something, you can go back to it and remember like specifics about things that you wrote because you wrote it sort of in real time.
Yeah.
That was it for me. That was it for me.
Yeah, writing is very therapeutic in a lot of ways as well. And then recording your day-to-day activities at work can also prove beneficial. So really documenting your work and your schedule, including descriptions of your projects, the associated tasks, and what has been done, as well as your to-do list with the next steps. They can all help you to really stay organized and effectively manage your time, and also creates a log of the tasks that you accomplished that day or week. Also, tracking hours and assignments could prove valuable if worst case scenario arises at work and you start to suspect that maybe there is a little bit of discrimination taking place. Again, as I mentioned, we don't bring this up because we think it's likely to happen. And obviously, I hope very much that none of you on this call ever experience that. But unfortunately, we do know that some people do run into problems in their workplaces. And in those instances, having a notebook where you've been keeping a detailed account of your time and accomplishments can prove very valuable in the event that you are concerned that they are kind of targeting you for anything. Now, whether or not to disclose your caregiver status at work is an important consideration, so that can be really complex. We're going to spend a few slides discussing it. We really tell people that disclosure exists on a spectrum. So keep in mind, it's not an all or nothing decision. Whatever you feel comfortable with sharing is totally valid, and sharing nothing is also an option. Also, remember to always consider how your loved one feels about you sharing about them in your workplace. Now, for those who do decide to disclose, you'll want to think about what and how much your supervisor and coworkers need to know, and know that the need for sharing may change over time as well. Remember, how much you share is entirely up to you. You can always share more, but once information has been disclosed, it cannot be unshared. So it's important to maybe start out with a little less and then think about what is maybe important to add in. And it's also important to think about disclosure on the online space and how that can have potential ramifications in the workplace, both for you and the person you're caring for. So we recommend that you each develop a personal disclosure plan for your online presence. Make clear decisions about what, if any, information about their cancer journey is okay to share online and off, and where you're going to share it in terms of specific websites or blogs, etc. And then communicate those decisions with the people in your network, because doing so can really help prevent some accidental, unwanted disclosures. And even if you have shared preferences, it's still a good idea to monitor what's out there and what others might be posting so that you have a sense of what's out there about you. It's also important to think through, let's say you posted a picture on Instagram of a hike you took or a walk you took, and everybody said, oh, it's so great that you were able to get out from XYZ or not at the hospital anymore. So this is really important to keep in mind, to really communicate with those in your network about what you would like to share and what you wouldn't. Also keep in mind that there's a potential long-term impact of online disclosure. So it could be the case that some of you or your loved one has shared at work and everyone's being really supportive, and that's an outstanding situation to be in. But the fact is that the internet doesn't go away, and none of us can predict the future. So your supportive boss may move on and be replaced by someone who starts Googling their new staff. And frankly, there's no way to know how that person is going to respond to the information that they find. And I wonder if you could speak to this from the HR perspective, Brandon.
Yeah, I mean, first from an HR perspective, your online presence from an HR perspective, most companies have social media policies. They tend to involve posting on the company's behalf or using their logos, et cetera. And of course, I wouldn't recommend ever doing anything on a company account or with a company logo. They don't tend to restrict you from having a personal account, but I do not, I recommend, if you choose to use social media at all, to use the outlets the way they're intended, right? So for example, posting your journey on LinkedIn might not be the best site for that. And to your point, there are some sites like Instagram stories or Facebook that maybe only last for 24 hours, but you also may not need the guy you went to elementary school with to be curious and checking in with you. Keep in mind, whatever you post, your loved one may also be getting pinged based on what you post. So you really, really need to be on the same page with that. So again, from an HR perspective, I would say there are, as to Nicole's point, niche sites for sharing information about your health information or your family's health journey that maybe have a specific link, private links that you can only log in with a password. Or the thing that I would recommend most of all, which is what my wife and I did, we just had a group of an email addresses that we shared email updates to the people that we needed, who needed to see it and that we wanted to give updates to, and that was it. But again, communication is key, being on the same page with your loved ones, and to your point, Googling yourself every once in a while, that's what potential employers will see. So it can't hurt every once in a while to Google yourself and see what's on there, what's showing up, at least on the first 2 or 3, pages. People don't tend to go to, employers don't tend to go to page 8 or 9, but certainly the first 2 or 3. Yeah.
Absolutely. So this brings us to wondering, do you have to tell your employer that you're a caregiver? So we're frequently asked whether this is a requirement to disclose that you're a caregiver, and generally speaking, there's no requirement to share this information, but people may decide that they want to for a variety of reasons. So it's important to ask yourself a couple of questions. Are there legal benefits to disclosing? So accessing some of those protections we discussed earlier. Interpersonal benefits to disclosing. Are there practical benefits to disclosing? Now, some people are sharers and they can't imagine a big life-changing event and not telling, but others feel very uncomfortable sharing information about their personal life and are much more private. So however you feel about sharing is valid and should be taken into account. As I mentioned earlier, that workplace culture can play a role as well. So if you work at a small company where your colleagues feel like a second family and know everything about your lives, or is it a big corporation where the environment is more competitive and heads down and private, it can be incredibly valuable to consider this as you begin to think if or how you even share that information. And then when contemplating who to tell, that's going to depend on your specific circumstances, and you might find yourself having to have a couple of disclosure conversations. So if that's the case, we do recommend starting with the person that it's going to be easiest to speak with, and that's going to likely be your supervisor, because there is someone who you can usually have an ongoing conversation with and who can potentially be an advocate for you with some of the higher ups. But it's important to bear in mind that most managers are not trained to be managers. So this might be the first time that they're having this type of conversation, and they may feel that they're in uncharted waters and really not sure what to do. And so it often puts the burden on the employee to help teach that manager what to do next. So we have linked some to our manager's toolkit on this slide, and this is something that we created. So there's something concrete that employees could take to their managers, into these conversations with their managers rather, that could really outline how they could best be supported. And it's just a really helpful, useful tool to get those conversations started. Now, for others, a supervisor might be out of the question, so they might want to go to HR instead. As Brandon can speak to, HR can be a font of information since they're the ones who understand the employer policies and may have even had experience with others who have been in similar circumstances in the past. But perhaps the most important thing to disclose in any of these conversations is really the idea that your plan is fluid, helping them understand that the things that you're sharing are what you know today and that it's likely going to be an ongoing conversation. This can help your employer really understand that you intend to communicate with the most updated information that you have. So I wonder if you could speak to the communication aspect of that, Brandon.
Communication is key for sure. I mean, communicating with your employer at a priority number one is you're almost reassuring them, right? You're reassuring that you're thinking about what they are concerned about, reassuring productivity will not suffer as a result of support, assuring your employer assuring there will be open communication and dialogue throughout, set up regular check-ins and status updates. And these days, I think it's actually even easier than when I was really in the thick of this, because these days email, phone, Zoom, being remote is actually much more common. But deciding what information you're comfortable sharing, you may just tell people that you're dealing with a family issue. Maybe they don't need to know all the details. So your coworkers understand there's something going on, but maybe it's a little bigger than they thought, but they know enough that they need to know. Strategically express any requests that you may have with your employer so that you can work together to meet your needs and theirs. So when you're thinking about disclosing, and this is a real thing, you have to be prepared for potential challenges. And as Nicole's been saying throughout, we hope that you don't have any challenges, and you may not have any challenges. People tend to be sympathetic and empathetic, but they're going to naturally have some concerns. Modified work arrangements, be prepared. Modified work arrangements are more common now than they've ever been before, but they may bring about some concerns with your employer. When you're brainstorming work modifications, you also try to anticipate the concerns that your employer may have and be proactive about proposing solutions. Modified work arrangements may also cause resentment from coworkers. Speak with your supervisor about how to make sure that coworkers feel comfortable with the setup and how to ensure that no one's taking on more than they should. A lack of a clear plan for your time away from the office can cause confusion around expectations. Make sure that you're explicit with what availability is and what it's not. And remember, this can change over time. This can help prevent potential conflicts that arise. Blocking off periods of time on a shared calendar, sending out availability updates when necessary. These are all things that will help put them at ease as much as possible.
Absolutely. Coming prepared with some of this information is part of the puzzle too. And of course, with so much juggling going on, the balancing act can feel overwhelming and really interrupt your focus. So some helpful habits to incorporate some better focus can include doing one thing at a time, making a list of priorities, avoiding outside distractions and turning off phone and email notifications, making sure to communicate when you're going to be doing that so people aren't desperately looking for you. Creating a cheat sheet, so if you're feeling distracted in a moment, you don't have to kind of have that head scratching moment where you're trying to figure out what you're trying to say or what you need to remember. Also staying organized and clearing away clutter can make a big difference. And always trying to build breaks into your day. There's a really great benefit to productivity and taking short breaks that just allow for a little bit of a reset, which everybody really does need throughout the day. In terms of communications at work, it can be really helpful to identify a point person who can be, your go-to to find out what's happening at work if you need to be away to take care of your loved one or take them to treatment. And it's also important to clarify that your work priorities are aligned with your supervisor and your team, and really understanding what's being expected from you and how you plan to deliver it. So this is a time when it's critical, very critical, that you're honest with yourself about what you can and can't do at work, and that you set fair boundaries and do your best to stick to them. It's also important to recognize triggers and personal limits before you hit the wall and find yourself overstressed. What often helps with these is to try to rehearse what we call professional no's. There's some examples on here, but these are just ultimately ways that you can, appropriately and professionally set a workplace boundary. I know it's really hard and scary to say no to your boss, but there are times when it's necessary, and in the end, it will make you a better employer and be more productive. And I wonder if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, I would take advantage of technology whenever possible, like I referenced earlier. For example, if you don't get work email on your phone, you might want to reconsider. We talked about this earlier. Caregivers tend to spend a lot of time in waiting rooms. These are opportunities to look at your phone and get some easy wins, respond to emails, update a calendar appointment, text with a coworker. These days, many company meetings are recorded on Zooms, whether you're live in person or not. And these recordings can be watched again during times, maybe while you're sitting on your phone in a waiting room, you can watch a Zoom meeting. You can often sort of stay in the know what's happening day to day a little bit more now than ever so before. So certainly, if given the opportunity, you should take advantage of technology as much as possible.
Absolutely.
So when you're having conversations with your employer, like we mentioned before, think about it from this perspective of your employer. Approach each conversation with a plan that includes on your accountability. Are there existing policies that may benefit you in the long run? References to any state or federal laws that may apply? Don't assume that your manager is up to date on the latest laws of the country or the state or anything like that. Understand that while a work modification may be approved, it may not be sustainable long term. We've talked a lot about playing sort of devil's advocate, sort of thinking as your employer and anticipating their concerns. This is very important. I think just demonstrating to them that you've thought about it in this way should give your employer some confidence here.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thinking about it through all the angles can help kind of bounce off some of those more challenging questions they might have. And it's totally understandable that many people are unsure about how to start such a conversation with a manager or a supervisor. A good approach is to acknowledge that you're taking the time, as we mentioned, to be thoughtful about your employer's interests and concerns as well as your own. So here are just a couple of examples of how you might start that conversation. Now, if this exact language works for you, you're welcome to use it, but you can always revise it to make it your own. I know that, it can totally depend on the type of relationship that you have with your employer, on your personality, on their personality, your communication styles, all of that. So really take a look at these and kind of get the idea of what it's saying and the setup for it, and then make it your own. Overall, when you're planning for these kinds of conversations, you just want to be sure to weave in the idea that you want to collaborate with your employer to really create a plan that ensures that both your needs and their needs are being met. I wonder if, you have any perspective to add there, both from the employee and the employer side.
It's up to everyone to decide how personal they want to share. In my case, I told my employers, I told my leaders, I was committed to figuring out how to balance this. And it wasn't just financially. I as a caregiver, you can also feel very helpless at times. And I needed some hours to be productive. I needed some hours to think about something else for a little while. And I obviously didn't want to go on leave and get a huge cut in my pay, but remember that timelines vary. Sometimes you're going to be busier than others. This treatment is 31 sessions. And then after 6 weeks, I'm more available. So, if no one knows what you're going through, it gets difficult to start sharing midway through. If you choose not to share very much at the beginning, it gets even more difficult over time. So just something else to keep in mind.
Absolutely. So dependent on everybody's situations.
Yeah.
So when we're thinking about communications, there's always the chance that your situation might be brought up by someone in the office in a way that's unwanted by you. This is another instance where it really pays to be prepared for facing these kinds of situations head on. And so some of these comments can be addressed using a verbal technique that we call the swivel. And ultimately, this is a verbal formula or pattern used in response to cancer-related comments that might be made by a well-intended colleague. So ultimately, it involves acknowledging the comment, putting an "and" right in the middle, and then really swiveling the conversation around to a topic that's more work-oriented. So these are just some examples up here. I know it can feel a bit brash and can be a little nerve-wracking, especially if you are someone who may not be particularly direct. But being able to shift the conversation back to a place where you feel comfortable can be really empowering. And it also indicates to your colleagues that you're still a whole, vibrant person with professional contributions to make that are despite of your personal circumstances and whatever else is going on in your personal life. So again, I encourage you to practice these. A lot of the time when we are caught off guard, we might say something that we really didn't mean or really didn't want to share. But the more that you practice this, the more comfortable you're going to get with some of those on-the-spot conversations that you may not have totally planned for. And I just want to end on this. While the challenges of caregiving can feel great, this is a selection from a caregiver's Bill of Rights that really provides some valuable reminders and affirmations that can get lost in all the noise of your responsibilities in everyday life. So feel free to use the link at the bottom of the slide to view the full copy. Maybe keep a copy of it with you when you're starting to feel overwhelmed or guilty or stressed. And just remember, at the end of the day, you have to be kind to yourself, and remember that this is not easy, but there are resources and there are people and support networks that are available to help you through some of those more challenging times. So I'm just going to invite Scott back up here to talk about a couple of our upcoming events, and then we'll jump into Q&A.
Thank you so much, Nicole and Brandon. That was really great and informative, and having your personal experience worked into all of this, Brandon, is really adding so much to it. Just a few quick things we have coming up. We have one more webinar left this year. It's going to be on December 6th, and that is marketing yourself. And then we're working on finalizing the dates for next year, so keep an eye out for in your email. And then we also we just put open up registration for our Midwest conference, which is going to be on March 23rd. That's our all-day conference. It's going to be happening again on Zoom, so you can join anywhere in the world. And we hope that we'll see you for one of those. And then
it's actually on the 22nd.
Thank you so much.
No problem. I know all of you are furiously writing down that date, but I just want to make sure we have everyone.
And these are some additional resources for you to click through. You should have gotten a copy of the deck with your Zoom link, so you can click through all of these later on.
Yeah.
We've got Nicole's contact info, and follow us on social media. And then if you want to connect with Brandon, you can find him on LinkedIn. That's the link here.
Happy to connect with anyone.
And then again, for those of you who are requesting CEs or PDCs, these are the requirements. We'll leave this up here. And I will turn it back over to Nicole for some questions.
Okay, great, thank you. It looks like we got a few in the Q&A box. This first one is from Jacqueline. Do some caregivers have to balance between caregiving and making sure they keep their jobs so that they don't lose health insurance used to pay for their loved one's medical care? I just thought about that after hearing about Brandon's personal experience.
Yes, of course. I mean, everyone's story is different, but certainly, I mean, I remember being on the 9th floor of Memorial Sloan Kettering and speaking to parents who were cops and firefighters who had to be here, or they didn't want to miss appointments, or and how difficult it was for them. You know, I was very lucky. I could do 80% of my job from a phone and a laptop, so I could do it from a waiting room from anywhere. But a lot of people don't have that opportunity, or they don't have the ability to have treatments near where they live. Everyone's story is different. It's certainly challenging. At nowhere did we say caregivers are heroes, but I think caregivers are heroes.
Absolutely. This next question is from Lindsay. How might you learn some of this information on policies and procedures if you're looking to make a career change?
Well, the good news is you're in the right place. Lean on Cancer and Careers. There's a lot of resources here in this deck, and a lot of resources at cancerandcareers.org, and I said it's .org, right? And
Yep.
And there are career coaches. I've also been lucky to be a career coach, and there's many other talented and experienced veterans on the career coach team who can assist. But you're in the right place, so you're already ahead of the game. But definitely besides the internet, you can start here.
Yeah, definitely. We're happy to help you kind of look into that. We also recommend using Glassdoor. Glassdoor is a great resource for learning about what benefits and are available. It's a little bit of for those of you unfamiliar, it's a website in which current and former employees can basically review companies. It's like basically a Yelp of employment, let's put it. And you can learn about benefits that are available. You can learn about whether they stick to what they say. That's usually a helpful thing. Obviously, take everything with a grain of salt. You know, some people might be disgruntled former employees, but overall, it's just a great way to understand what the PTO is like, what the health insurance is like. Sometimes people will mention what the actual health insurance is, which is gold, because usually you don't learn that stuff until you're really deep into the interviewing process. So, you know, we would definitely recommend, we always recommend when you're doing a job search that you're doing some pretty deep research into what the company is like, so you make sure that it's going to meet your needs. It's a two-way street when you are looking for a new job. So, all right, and I think we have time for one more question. Any advice on transitioning jobs as or careers as a caregiver? I feel very stuck with where I am, both for changing health insurance that my loved one is on, and for not qualifying for FMLA if I do need to use it again.
Well, this is a very difficult question to answer, in the sense that everyone's story is unique. But of course, to your point, if you think it's difficult disclosing to a place where you've worked for years, imagine disclosing to a place that you've never met and that they don't know you at all. It's even more difficult. I actually did change jobs during the 4 years of my daughter's treatment. I moved into the healthcare industry, as it was mentioned at the beginning, and I find a lot of people that are in the healthcare industry have sort of a personal story that brought them there. And so for me, when I had the opportunity and I had the right person in the interview room with me, that was when I sort of said, this is all dependent on your ability to allow me this flexibility. And I asked for benefits information a little sooner in the process maybe than I normally would have. And I didn't share it with the entire company, but when I had the right leader in the room with me, I did bring it up and sort of said what my concerns were. And that would have been a deal breaker for me if the answers weren't where I needed them to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's different for every circumstance,
Everyone.
right? And,
Yeah.
you know, it's not necessary that you share the information right off the bat. You know, life exists before a new job. So, you know, people have vacations planned, they have doctor's appointments planned already before they know that they're going to get this job. So there is a certain level of flexibility that employers may assume they're going to need to have given, you know, start dates or schedules or whatever the case may be. So, you know, if you are going to share some more personal information and share this about yourself and disclose some of this information, we just recommend that you wait a little bit into the hiring process. So not the first interview, maybe if the second interview, you've had the opportunity to meet a couple different people and you feel like they've really gotten the opportunity to get to know you and see what you can bring to the table, they'll be much more willing to be flexible. Whereas if they don't know you at all and you decide to tell them in your cover letter that you're going to need X, Y, and Z flexibility, then like that's probably not going to work. So again, you know, it's not impossible to get a new job while you're caregiving. It's not impossible to get a new job when you have cancer, but it's just about the approach that you take that is really important when it comes to, you know, the disclosure piece of it. For the sake of time, since this is an evening webinar, I do want to just wrap up so that everybody can get on with their evening. Thank you so much, Brandon. You know, it's really special to be able to hear from someone who has kind of lived both sides of it and can really offer such a unique and really important perspective and insight into these situations. So I'm sure I speak for everyone that's on this call that thank you so much. This was really, really valuable.
Well, thank you for that. And it was in 2017 when I was in the thick of things and saw cancer in careers. It was about HR and talent acquisition and cancer, and it was everything that I was dealing with. And I've been very lucky to have found all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. And have a great night, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Please plan to fill out the evaluation before you leave.